everything's fixed. But what I am saying is that it is different now, and the police department is very, very open to this, and as part of that, like the old days, it was like roll through, stop anybody who looks the least bit suspicious, right? They're just dressed the wrong way or something. That's over. Now they're focusing only on people they know are violent.
Can you understand where a family member would come out and tell you that sounds good, really awesome, but a little bit too late?
Totally. We don't think that we can just say, hey, community policing, now everything's fine. We realize this is a long process of talking and especially listening. And so all I'm saying today is we want people to know that
and if you knew this kind of thing was happening anyways, why did you wait so long for things to happen and just to do what you're doing now?
This has actually been happening for quite a while. But certainly with these shootings and the level of concern, that accelerated it.
From the community.
We realized it's more urgent. And I can say, I also want to say that the protests that we've seen so far, which have been almost 100% peaceful.
Yes.
People like angry, of course, saying what they think, of course, but almost 100% peaceful. And the problems we had, I don't believe were protesters. I think those were violent.
Those were people from outside of the city.
It's like people, they're just looking for an excuse to make trouble. So I want to say that those protests have been very useful.
Yes.
And the willingness of people to exercise their rights to protest. Even when they're saying, bad things about the cops, we actually are really glad to see that it's peaceful protest and people feel like they can say what they think. And as part of this community policing thing, we are welcoming people, not just to do that, but to come in and sit down. And it doesn't have to be at the police station. We want to meet at the community centers, in people's living rooms if they want, wherever they want, and make people feel comfortable. And let's listen and let's talk. Realizing we don't heal something like this with one conversation, one precedent. This is going to be a process that's going to take months and years.
Because kind of like what you said, I don't even know what to tell my kids anymore. I don't even know what to tell them about you guys anymore. Before, they're the ones that are helping you or whatever. I don't know what to tell them anymore.
It's still true. And if we talk and listen, I think you will find people will listen. And you don't have to sanitize what you want to say. And we would just hope people will also listen in return. And it could be we'll never make people feel good. Nobody's ever going to feel good about the fact that people died. As I say, even if it is determined that it was legal and justified, it's still never going to feel good. But what I will say is that I think you'll find that it's a very, very welcoming environment for talking honestly, as privately or as publicly as you want, and really being listened to. And we just can't emphasize that enough. That's what this community policing thing is all about.
Do you have a card?
Sure.
And so then that way we can follow up with them. Because the whole thing is we had pink signs out there, and when the protests were happening, and the youth came. Do you want one too?
And I think it's a lot of, they come out and they say, well, we're doing, but that's all we're hearing, or we hear your concerns. But we don't see any action. So for us, that's our biggest concern as community members, that it almost feels like they're saying that just to make us quiet for the moment, but in the big, longer picture, what's really needed?
Yeah.
There's underlying issues.
No, I understand that. Well, there are a few things being done. There's actually quite a few things being done, but not all of them are all that obvious. And I'll tell you, part of it is it's hard to get news coverage of stuff that's not really exciting, like the hard work of meeting and talking. So, for example, there's this program called Governing for Racial Equity. You've heard about this?
That's us.
Oh, of course, it's BHC and Milka, right?
Yeah.
So this is really exciting.
Yes. That's what we're doing.
It's really exciting, and it's something that takes a long time and is going to go on for a long time, so it's not going to show up on the news very often. It showed up on the news when we started it, and it got a lot of good coverage. But that continues, and for the first time, you have the leaders of the city and the entire staff committed to this concept of governing for racial equity. Now, they were always, of course, legally committed to, not discriminating and all of that stuff. And I would say, everybody at the city of Salinas, wants to govern fairly. But what this does is it recognizes that there are a lot of systems that end up being unfair.
Yep.
Even though, you probably can't find anybody who says, I want this to be unfair, right? But the systems are still unfair in lots of ways, right? And the city has a role in that. And the way we fix that is by working with community members like VHC and all those folks. And that's a really exciting collaboration with a long-term commitment and it's from the top of the city government and the police and everybody throughout all the ranks. So, you don't really see that happening, but it is happening and it's important. The Here to Here program is another one. The CASP officers, for example, in the Hebron, you've heard of the CASP officers? We have 2 officers assigned to the Hebron. No, this. Pardon me?
Will they arrest youth and they violate their rights?
Not that I'm aware of, but if you've got.
That's why the crime has went down, because they've actually incarcerated.
No, these officers almost never arrest anybody.
They harass them.
This is not something I've heard.
I live in that neighborhood.
If you'd like to give me information about that, I'd like
I live in that neighborhood.
the CASP officers.
maybe?
You guys excuse me, we need to get ready to do this, but I really want to encourage you, if anybody else wants my card, or go to salinas.com. As I say, here is throwing the door open. We don't expect everything we hear is going to be good news. We really want to listen, and we really want to.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Melinda Haig. I'm the United States Attorney here in the Northern District of California. Thank you for being here this morning. We are here to announce that the Department of Justice Office of Community-Oriented Policing will bring the services of its Collaborative Reform Initiative to Salinas and the Salinas Police Department. Through Collaborative Reform, the COPS Office will work with Chief McMillan and the Police Department to assess issues that affect police and community relationships here in Salinas. The department will receive technical assistance through the analysis of policies, training, and tactics, and if appropriate, recommendations for change and assistance with implementing change. Collaborative reform is a long-term strategy that identifies issues within an agency affecting public trust and offers ways to improve relationships between the police and the people that they are sworn to protect. The philosophy underpinning the DOJ COPS office and the collaborative reform is this. Rather than simply responding to crimes once they have been committed, community policing concentrates on preventing crime and eliminating the atmosphere of fear that it creates. Having the trust of the community and making individual stakeholders a part of their own safety enables law enforcement to better understand and address both the needs of the communities and the factors that contribute to crime. Here with me today are Ron Davis, the Director of the COPS Office in Washington, D.C., Salinas Mayor Joe Gunter, City Manager Ray Corpus, Police Chief Kelly McMillan, District Attorney Dean Flippo, the COPS Program Manager Tawana Elliott, and the COPS Site Manager Jessica Mansurian. And also 2 consultants with an organization called IIR, Intergovernmental Research Institute. The 2 people from IIR here are Gina Harsfield and Rick Gregory. They're working with the COPS office to deliver training and technical assistance to collaborative reform sites in different parts of the country. As you may know, Chief McMillan requested collaborative reform by way of a letter to the COPS office last fall. In response to Chief McMillan's letter, COPS office officials visited Salinas in January, and based on their site visit, they concluded that Salinas would benefit from the collaborative reform model. Director Davis and the other folks from the COPS office met this morning with Chief McMillan, his command staff, Mayor Gunter, and the city manager to discuss the goals and objectives of the program. And later today, the COPS office staff will meet with community members to discuss the program as well. The issues that Salinas is facing and that we're here to address today are national issues, unfortunately. There are issues of building trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve all over the country, most recently demonstrated by the shooting of 2 police officers in Ferguson, Missouri last night. Yesterday, we convened a meeting in San Francisco. 170 law enforcement leaders came to San Francisco to talk about these issues, building community trust, police legitimacy, and procedural justice. I'm happy to say that our law enforcement agencies here in Northern California are taking these issues incredibly seriously. We have very accomplished, capable leadership in law enforcement here in Northern California. We started planning the meeting that took place yesterday, last July. When we started planning the meeting last July, we didn't know that Michael Brown would be killed the following month. We didn't know that Eric Garner would be killed soon thereafter. We didn't know that the NYPD officers, Officer Liu and Officer Ramos, would be killed. We didn't know another thing that has happened in the interim, which is that the President formed a task force called the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. He formed that task force in December. Ron Davis, the director of the COPS office, is the executive director of that task force. The President gave them a very difficult job to do, which was in 90 days. He wanted them to come up with recommendations for law enforcement agencies to consider adopting all around the country that address building trust between law enforcement agencies and the communities that they serve. Despite the difficult task that the President gave Ron and the rest of the folks on the task force, they honored their commitment to the President. They released their report about 10 days ago, I believe, and it does contain a number of recommendations for law enforcement agencies to consider. Also, what we didn't know when we started planning the meeting that took place yesterday is that the Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C. at the Department of Justice would issue its reports regarding Ferguson and Michael Brown's death. And as you know, I'm sure, the Department of Justice concluded that it was not appropriate to prosecute Officer Wilson in connection with Michael Brown's death. But they also made a finding of a pattern and practice of constitutional violations in Ferguson, both within the police department and notably the court system in Ferguson. If you haven't had a chance to read these reports, they are quite eye-opening, especially with respect to the court system and the way things were working there in Ferguson. So these issues are being felt all around the country. It's important that we rebuild and build trust between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. We need the communities to see law enforcement as legitimate so that they feel protected and safe, so that they feel they can work with law enforcement, that they work as a partnership to keep their communities safe, not as enemies. It's important here in Salinas, it's important all over the country. So we're happy to be part of the dialogue, and I can assure you that the 170 law enforcement leaders, and this was just the top leadership, this was the chiefs, the sheriffs, their command staffs, district attorneys, coming together to talk about these issues at a very deep and robust level, but at a very high level in terms of the people that were coming together. And the leadership here in Northern California is on board with this movement. I can tell you that this area was well represented. Your district attorney, Dean Flippo, was there yesterday, along with his chief investigator. The sheriff was there. The undersheriff was there. Representatives, Chief McMillan, Kelly McMillan was there. Representatives from the Monterey Police Department as well as the Marina Police Department were there. So this area was also well represented at the meeting yesterday. So I will now turn the podium over to Director Davis from the COPS office.
Thank you, Melinda. Good afternoon. As Melinda said, my name is Ron Davis, and I'm the Director of the Department of Justice COPS Office, the Office of Community Policing Services. Before I get started, let me thank Melinda for her leadership as the U.S. Attorney for the District of Northern California and the great work that she's doing, like this convening. What Melinda talked about initially was right now this issue of building trust between our police departments and communities, especially communities of color. And I think recent events going back to Michael Brown, to Eric Garner, and others really underscore the need. So we agreed to do collaborative reform. One of the things that underscores that I think about is the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. And one of the things the President was very clear about is he said, one, he wanted to really come up with concrete recommendations, meaning recommendations that were actionable, recommendations that the field could and should and would embrace, recommendations that the community can participate in, recommendations that could be implemented that would, one, build trust between our police department.
First of all, I want to thank Ron. I want to thank Melinda, the district attorney, and the chief, because this was a joint venture where they all got together, they've talked to all the staff, and they knew that we were stepping up. We were willing to open our doors and to go forward. So we're very happy and grateful to receive the support of the COPS office and assistance from the experts of the Institute for Intergovernmental Research. The city and the police department are united in commitment to community-oriented policing. I can say this, speaking both as the mayor and a former member of the police department, the best policy is the kind that's based on a close, trusting relationship with the people we serve. That's what the community policing is all about. With the help of the COPS office, we have the chance to get the advice from the national experts on how we can do community policing effectively as possible. So with that being said, I'm going to introduce the chief, and I want to thank him for taking the leadership role in this and willing to step up and lead this community. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I want to start, too, by thanking our U.S. Attorney, Melinda Haig, for her years of leadership and support of the Salinas Police Department, this community of Salinas, with driving federal resources here, her support of the Law Enforcement Operations Center, staffing that with resources Salinas historically had never received, and her ongoing support through these difficult times we've been having here in Salinas. I also want to express my tremendous gratitude to Director Davis and the COPS office. The COPS office has been a huge supporter of the Salinas Police Department for many years, primarily rehiring grants. We are the recipients of 3 grants to rehire police officers lost through the recession. Most recently, you'll recall the School Resource Officer Grant. That grant funds 8 school resource officers for 3 years. Because of the dire financial straits here in Salinas, we are one of very few agencies who received a full waiver of the matching funds. As a result, our rehiring grant out of the COPS office was the largest in the state of California and the second largest in the United States of America. And I think that speaks to a few things: recognition by the COPS office of the need in Salinas, and the hard work that Salinas police officers can do when appropriately staffed and resourced. As the mayor said, we as a city are committed to community-oriented policing, and you see the framework for that in Hebron with our community police officers out there. You see our commitment to that in the CalGRIP grant that will place a place-based police officer on Acosta Plaza. And I hope you will see in the future, as we're able to grow the police department and other city resources with Measure G funding, you will see those programs expand to other areas where we can get past the emergency response that we're into now and into deep community relationships where we're able to place police officers in neighborhoods over the long term where they can build those deep community relationships. When things started to come to a head last year, we reached out to the Department of Justice Community Relations Service and engaged Marquez Equilibria, conciliation specialist. He has been involved in this conversation with the COPS office in terms of helping us identify interested community members. Some of the other things that we're working on is upgrading and reevaluating our hiring practices, hoping to attract, as you've heard me say many, many times, the people who can best serve Salinas and those are young people from our community, and helping us identify ways to recruit them into the Salinas Police Department. The people who know Salinas are best equipped to police Salinas. We have our Here to Hear program, continuing social media outreach, and our ongoing commitment to the Community Alliance for Safety and Peace as part of the larger collaborative that's recognized now on a national stage as a model for collaborative violence reduction. So I intentionally want to keep my comments short. I'm sure there are many questions, but again, my thanks to the United States Attorney's Office and to Director Davis for his engagement in collaborative reform. We look forward to that participation. Thank you.
Okay, let's go with one round of questions with, because I know some folks have to take off, with one follow-up.
I got a question. You're going to start using less lethal forms of subduing someone who's acting erratic?
Please provide your name and outlet as well.
Oh, Eugene Piquet. I'm with Voice of the Street, the homeless newspaper.
And who's your question directed to?
McMillan.
So if you weren't able to hear, the question is about less lethal alternatives to force, and if we intend to employ them. And the fact of the matter is we have for many, many years. use less lethal options, less lethal force options. And of course, lethal force is always our last resort. But we've deployed tasers in Salinas for many, many years. We have less lethal impact munitions. Of course, the chemical agents like pepper spray that we've carried for years. Those force options remain and are an important part of our toolkit. The challenge is in making sure that the appropriate level of force is used given the circumstances, and I'm very sure that that's something that the COPS office is going to look at, and they will make an assessment, so you won't have to take my word for it whether we're doing it correctly or not.
For the director, Mr. Davis, and U.S. Attorney Melinda Hay, forgive me if I pronounced it correctly. I'm Jose Castaneda. I'm the City Council member for District 1, City of Salinas. We're under the protected jurisdiction under Monterey County, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Historically, from the 1930 boycotts to the Dust Bowl that John Steinbeck has raised, as well as to the present time right now with the heavy immigration of Latinos, predominantly Spanish speakers and palm working community. We've been wanting to be heard by the city, by leaders, and it unfortunately has to take to this measure that you guys are now present. As a matter of fact, the mayor and I can't even get a return phone call or email from him unless I contact the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., and they come and a meeting between us. That's just unfortunate. But there is high tension here. And before Ferguson, since Darrell Wilson and the whole Michael Brown in August, we've had Angel Ruiz, Osman Hernandez, Carlos Mejia, Frank Alvarado Jr., Jaime Garcia, and that's just 2014. We can go way back in history here. Can we expect from your office and from yourselves the same treatment that you have given Ferguson? Or does my constituents and myself, what else do we need to do to get your ears and your eyes to look at entirely what has been happening here? Disenfranchisement. We have many things that we've been willing to and wanting to share with you privately, and that has not happened. So can we expect the report that has come out from Ferguson, which Ferguson was in August, Angel Ruiz and all these other happened since May, even before that. 2 senators have come out publicly asking for the disbandment of that department. There's been numerous resignations because of that as well. We need your help. Can we expect that report from what you were talking about earlier, similar to what Ferguson has received, the attention that Ferguson has received?
So let me answer the question if I may. Sure. I think I understand. So one, as you say, treatment, I think that's maybe require a little bit more defining, but I'll tell you what you can count on. I think I do understand the question. Is one, that the report, just like the investigation of Ferguson, will be independent, it will be objective, it will be based on the facts that we see and the assessments that we make. That report will be made public, that in making the assessment that we will absolutely engage, listen to, and count on community involvement. So I would say for those who, I can't speak to the past, but I would say from our process, sir, that we definitely want to hear from the community. It's a very critical component of it, because their assessment matters, and not just from a superficial perception point of view, but from what people are feeling like is going on to the ground, that our experts will go on ride-alongs, that they will attend community meetings, that they will engage to understand exactly what's going on, so that when we assess, that we're comfortable with the assessment. But equally important, if not more important, that when we make recommendations on how to proceed forward, that there are real recommendations that get to the heart and soul of a problem. Many things that occur at the surface are just that. They're symptoms of a much larger, deep-rooted issue. And if that issue is communication, well, the chief has already asked us to take a look at that kind of communication between the police department and the community, asked us to take a look at how we build trust between the police department and the community. So I think it sounds like, I can't say what was or was not heard, but I would say the process that we're going to engage, I think you hopefully will be a part of it, that you will connect us with people that want to talk to us, that want to engage with us, and I think you'll be definitely happy with the process and how we engage and what the product will be. So I can't promise you what it will look like, because I think the part that is independent objective is that we start with no end in mind other fair, independent objective. But I can promise you we would definitely maintain that. It's important to us and our credibility.
The next part was what happens if you discover what Ferguson has discovered, that the community has been telling everyone all this time that there is systematic racial bias or anything else. So what happens at that time?
That's a very good question. So as we identify shortcomings, let's say there are shortcomings in the department, we will make that very clear. What can happen then, I think those assessments need to be made at that time. There will be decisions that the police department has to make. There will be decisions that the local elected officials have to make. And let me just say this so you understand the process. The collaborative reform process is a rigorous, independent, objective process, but it does not preclude the Civil Rights Division from starting an investigation in the future. And so if things are a pattern of practice, if there's no changes being made and the community is being violated, the Department of Justice will always retain the right to do a pattern of practice investigation. So this doesn't close doors, this opens up opportunities, the ability to collaborate, to proceed forward, and if anything, we can actually be successful together, but we never close out the options which will be in the best interest of protecting the Constitution for those that live in Salinas.
We'll go here and then we'll get that.
My name is Margaret Sedena-Panetti. I'm a community and human rights activist here in the city of Salinas. I'd like to thank you very much for coming to the city of Salinas. I'd like to thank the U.S. Attorney also for coming here. I'm one of the individuals who went to San Francisco and made a request for you to be here, so thank you very much. One of the problems that has really caused more of this distrust is a lack of transparency. Communication with the city and the community. There's a very large migrant and undocumented population that exists here and that are very fearful of coming out of the shadows and engaging, which is why Salinas is not like Ferguson, because we very much are Ferguson, but people are afraid of being deported. And we had one of those individuals that was shot that laid in the street for 3.5 hours, 4 hours, just like Mike Ferguson did. A night of a protest, and we had a protest, someone was shot 3 blocks away. That scares the community. It had nothing to do with the protest, but it scares the community about coming out and being vocal. So I'd like to, with this whole issue of transparency, as an example today, as we see here, it's a very small group that is here. It's been put out, and it's on the webpage, that a select group was to meet with those who are present today. Yet when I have talked to different individuals out of your office, it's supposed to be open to the community, just like it was in Ferguson. Ferguson, they had a very large meeting. There were a lot of issues that came out of it, which came down to the warrants, the stops, the searches, the whole revenue collection that was going off of the public, the problems with the TA's office, the problems, just all of those cans of worms. And like Mr. Castaneda, I also would like this to be more in-depth communication with the public, with people that are you're not going to, migrants and undocumented are very different. They fear quite a bit. Let me
take on the questions. You're going to lose me. I'm sorry.
Okay.
In the second time, I want to get to the actual issue and the question, if you don't mind. So one would be the issue of community engagement. So today, as you heard later, we'll meet with some community members. But let me just speak for the Department of Justice. So today we'll start with meeting, whether you call it a select group or a smaller, I would call it a smaller group. The next part of our process is exactly that. Will be a meeting that we will set from the Department of Justice, which will be more of a town hall meeting once we get a better understanding of the community. It may take multiple meetings in which anyone can come to and be able to talk to the experts that we're going to use. So look at today as not that the group that meets today is providing some feedback, but we recognize that there's a lot of voices absolutely not here today, that we need to create the venue. The fact of the idea of a large immigrant population is also not a unique challenge to Salinas. And so as we look at how the department is engaging in building trust, how it is communicating, how residents feel comfortable and safe, not being afraid of deportation or other acts, those are the lessons we also want to learn here. We want to give the best practices here so that we can also give this to a lot of agencies, a lot of other communities that are also very concerned about the same thing. So that part, I think, is one of the interests that we do have, is that this is not unique. But for the community, I think what I would ask for for you and for the council member is, as we set this up, is to let people know that they can come talk to us, that we're not going to be engaging in civil, immigration enforcement, that we can have private talks, that we will basically want to hear from the community so that we can hear the voice and hear whatever trends or patterns. So this is an opportunity. It's also an opportunity for you to share not just what maybe has not occurred, but what you think is actually going to be helpful moving forward. In other words, what can we do to make sure that there's a better communication so that everyone in Salinas feels comfortable talking to the police department, making complaints, reporting crime, engaging, being part of the American dream, for lack of a better phrase. So I look forward to that, and I would solicit your help.
So again, the other part of that, very important part of that, is data, which is collected by the police department, which is sent off to the Department of Justice. It's a very limited amount of data that actually goes up there. They don't report everything because they're not required to, and they don't really keep records on all of it. Information that I've requested, I was told, would cost over $50-something an hour for somebody to do it. That precludes a regular member of the public from getting information. But on that data, I wanted to point out, Salinas, it's been said by the city of Salinas, city of Salinas is about 75% Latino population, and yet 90% of the stops are with the Latino community. 100% of the shootings are Latino community.
We have some other questions, so I would ask if you would like.
Well, I'm wondering, are you going to be looking at that kind of data, or is there a possibility in the future?
Well, we're going to look at everything. So one of the things, we look at all the data the department has. A part of that will identify, we'll look at the data that they have and identify the data that they should have, right? Which means they may not have the data. In many cases, departments collect the data, but it's just sitting there not being used. In some cases, they're not collecting the data that would be useful to determine whether or not the practices have a disparate outcome, whether or not they're effective. So I think we're definitely on the same page as we move forward. I don't want to cut you off, but I want to
No, that's fine.
to the question. But the data part is part of the process for sure.
Thank you.
Yes, and a reminder, question, one follow-up.
So for Director Davis or the U.S. Attorney, you spoke of this program actually already being in process in other cities. I believe you mentioned Las Vegas was the first. It was the first thing you mentioned. I'm wondering, either one of you, could you give us some concrete things that you've already learned that you know just from experience, professionally, as well as what's happened, let's say in Las Vegas, that you can apply here in Salinas?
So there's a couple things I would say. There's some examples if I were to say this. One is a focus on de-escalation. In other words, officers, training officers to be able to respond to any scenario, which is usually not the bigger challenge, but to be able to de-escalate when a scenario situation does not require any continued use of force or that it has changed. One of the things that stands out right now is one of the national models from Las Vegas is also this reality-based training with regards to use of force. So you can have classroom training, there's policies, but you have to put officers through the training in which they have to make the decision in a safe environment, but they can be evaluated. You can start evaluating decision making. So they have a reality base where they'll create scenarios, they'll go into different places, obviously unoccupied, and have role players and test their skills in making these split-second decisions, not only to escalate to respond, but quite frankly, more often than not, to de-escalate. In other words, making sure you make the right assessment, that the assessment is not tainted by implicit bias, and that you're always thinking about finding the least obstructive way to accomplish the mission. So I think what we see around the country is that when we focus on de-escalation, when we have strong policy that provide a continuum of force that is based on the Constitution, that is based on not just what force can be used, but quite frankly, what force should be used. And quite often why that's important is because just because a force is legal does not mean the community likes what it's seeing, that there wasn't better options, and that there still could have been lower ways to accomplish that mission. So we want the mindset to change and not simply do what's authorized, but do what absolutely is in the best interest of the community, of the officer's safety, in the least obstructive way while embracing the Constitution. So that focus, that reality-based training, that continuum, connecting them to best practices, is very, very important. We've seen it work around the country.
So my follow-up would be, that I appreciate what you're saying, but it seems like that's cold comfort to an officer that's facing a suspect that is not dropping a potentially lethal weapon. He's not obeying commands, and in a situation you may or may not have that person with that weapon walking into a more volatile situation where there's other innocent people that could be harmed. And that was an example of what kind of happened in one of the situations the officer involved here last year. So I'm just wondering, we don't pay cops to go on shift and die.
I'm glad you said it. That's exactly right.
So what can we do when someone we don't have a ray gun yet that can immobilize them?
So if I can say, the idea of the use of force continuum is about looking at the scenario and matching that force that was necessary to overcome, to be safe. And so I don't think there's anything that we would respond to, that we would recommend, that would lessen officer safety. In other words, but de-escalation is saying that when force is not needed, that you can assess the situation, so maybe it's needed when you first start, but something changes, you can de-escalate. What we also see is that the places that are focusing on de-escalation, changing that kind of culture of not can I, but should I, and are looking at changing the culture from being a warrior and that in enforcement of laws to being a guardian of the Constitution, is not only
that gang problem is escalated because they're just foot soldiers for the cartels. How does that tie in with the Department of Justice to seeing that we address the war on drugs properly and in a new avenue that's not just punitive?
So I think the first thing would be is to end the war on drugs, right? Because we don't have war in our communities. So if we're still fighting a war on drugs, then probably that would be the first recommendation I would make as the cops director, is to end that war and actually now look at real solutions on how you deal with gang problems, which means you try to get to some of the root causes of why young people are in gangs, which means you're going to have to talk to young people, you're going to have to engage with them, you're going to have to listen to them, you're going to have to work with them. They're going to have a voice as well. And so the fact that there's gang challenges, one is not unique, unfortunately. There's a lot of root cause reasons why that exists. That's also rooted in trust. So I think the stronger the relationship is between the police department and the community, the better the crime fighting gets, quite frankly, in the end. Because now you have people that are willing to talk to you, willing to help you, willing to come to the solutions, young people that may look to for guidance versus looking to for gangs where there may be some absences in their life. So I don't think that's a hindrance. And in fact, I think effective crime reduction demands constitutional policing and building trust, and that they should not be separated. So I understand the question greatly, but I think the key is to stay the course where the department is heading, to focus on building trust, to establish the legitimacy, to build the kind of, use the kind of strategies that fight crime that are evidence-based and effective, that do not have the kind of collateral damage. And talking to the chief, we understand that collateral damage, for example, has resulted in a mass and disparate incarceration rate of young men of color in this nation, and it has to stop. That is not an effective way to fight crime in this country. So as we work with agencies, we promote those kind of solutions, whether they're reentry, whether it is providing people alternative through ceasefire or others, with group violence reduction. We find those recommendations that are evidence-based, that do not have the collateral damage, and that should actually build coalitions along the way, not destroy them.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I actually have to use them out of here. I understand the mayor and the police chief are available or remaining in the room and available for questions. Thank you.
Yes, I am.
For once, you gotta say, they are guilty. Yeah.
Homicide.
We tired for the chief of police being covered up and covered up and covered up. You know the penal code's been broke. 832 penal code never went through the police department. They never use it. That's why they did what they did. Because they don't know how to use the penal codes. And they don't know how to enforce the law. They took 5 innocent lives. Blaming on they got weapons. What weapons? Phone is not a weapon. Equipment for the guard is not a weapon. But they carry what? Bags, gun, tasers, badges. Badges. That's the trouble with it. But you know what? I hope the Department of Justice review. Because if they review the police department, they're going to find out. They're not going to review nada. How filthy police department we got right here in Salinas. Thank you.
Justice Department.
You know, one of the things that we want to see come out of today is we'd like for the Department of Justice to do a very in-depth investigation, such as they did in Ferguson, Because we find that there's discriminatory practices very evident. We've got a population about 75% Latino, and yet 90% of those stops, those curbside stops, the data, it's there. We need them to get in there and look at it the way they did in Ferguson, because we can see this. 100% of those killed were Latino, in the Latino community. So we know there's a problem. Today, this meeting that took place was billed as a meeting that was, it was put on the website, and yet it was billed very much as a meeting that was going to be sort of an exclusive meeting. It was not even an inviting of the public. So there was no invitation for the public to be here at this meeting, and there's no invitation for the public to even partake in the meeting that's coming up. I'm lucky I've been invited by cops to partake in the meeting, and so I do have every intention of being at
You don't
that
have to
meeting.
be
But I
invited.
can tell you
It's
that
your community center.
But I was going to just say that it is a public meeting with public money, and that any member of the public that wishes to go into that meeting has every right to attend it, because it is being paid that way. All we ask from the media is that you tell the whole truth. We've had the chief of police doing PR, going out on his publicity tour, going to universities, going on a book tour at one point with a reporter who I won't name, and getting out and telling a very slighted side, which is the police officer side. Now, I can understand that the chief of police is fearful. That's his department, and any admission of any wrongdoing doesn't look well on the police department because there is litigation. But this is a very serious issue. People have lost their lives, and families have been destroyed. A community has no trust. We have a large migrant population here, a lot of undocumented workers who don't feel safe in this community. And we need to feel that this is our community. And we need to feel that this is the place that we can all feel safe in again. So de-escalation, I think, is something that's very important, that they need to be looking at those practices of de-escalation rather than reverting to using the gun right away and then justifying it later on. As we even heard a reporter asking a question that was very slighted towards the police department, saying that, well, what about the police? We haven't seen police officers getting shot down. We've seen...
De-escalation is too slow.
Community and people
Excuse me, I'm interrupting. You're talking about de-escalation. That's too slow.
That's what we think. That's what we believe we need.
We need enforcement of the law. It's under the Penal Law of California 532.
We need recommendations to come in.
Protection of the law.
The recommendations that we would like to see
don't need this
out of the Department of Justice are very much in line with what's come out of Ferguson, because we know those problems exist here. They exist in Oakland. They exist in other places. So, we want the members of this community included and not portrayed as a council member did on the radio yesterday.
We want justice.
If they're angry, it's because they have every right.
We want community. And that's fun. But here, abroad, we want justice. We want peace. We want safe community. It's fun. But here, abroad, we want justice. We want peace. We want safe community. Fun. But here, abroad, we want justice. We want peace. We want safe community. Usman, Bahia, Amarano. We want justice. We want peace. We want safe community. Usman, Bahia, Amarano. We want justice. We want peace. We want